Bonsoir à tous. Je suis ravie d'être parmi vous.
Good evening.
Soyez les
Good evening,
bienvenus.
everyone.
Nous sommes ici,
Welcome.
ce soir ensemble
We're
pour
delighted
explorer
to
des
have
chemins,
you together.
ceux
We're
qui
going
se
to
dessinent et qui vont
explore
nous conduire
a number of
collectivement à la
things
transition
that will
écologique.
collectively take
Les
us
objectifs chiffrés, vous les
to
connaissez, ils sont connus, ils ont même été annoncés et
to the
décidés,
transition,
mais ce qu'il faut savoir,
climate
c'est que malgré
transition.
les alertes
In
et
spite
les
of
prises de
all the
conscience parce qu'elles
alerts
sont là,
and
eh
raising
bien, les émissions de
awareness,
CO2 dans le monde ont
CO2
continué de
emissions
progresser de
worldwide
1,1%
are
en
still
2023
increasing,
par rapport à l'année
1.1%
dernière.
in
Et
2023
ce sont les
versus
toutes dernières
last year.
constatations qui nous reviennent
These are
de
the very
la COP28 qui s'achève.
the most recent
Elles
numbers coming
augmentent moins
from
vite, c'est vrai,
COP28.
mais
They're
en
increasing
principe, elles auraient dû
at a lower pace than
commencer
before,
à réduire,
but they should have actually
même si la France
declined.
et l'Europe ont été particulièrement
France
ambitieux
and
dans
Europe
le rythme à tenir pour
were very
parvenir justement à
ambitious,
cette neutralité carbone.
but still, it
À
has
cela
not
s'ajoutent,
been
vous le savez,
enough.
de nouveaux défis. Il y a bien sûr
There are
la
also new
biodiversité,
challenges
les
such as
pollutions au
biodiversity,
pluriel, la justice
multiple sources
environnementale.
of pollution,
Là aussi, vous le
environmental
savez, des engagements
justice.
ont été pris
Once again,
sur la
commitments
biodiversité,
were
notamment
made
avec
on
l'accord de
biodiversity
Montréal
with the
Community. Il nous
Montreal
engage,
Agreement.
il nous engage forcément tous,
It
que ce
is
soit les États bien sûr, mais
asking us
aussi
to
les entreprises
move,
que vous
to
êtes,
take
les individus
actions,
que nous
whether we're
sommes.
states
Alors vous connaissez,
or
si
corporate
vous êtes d'ici,
organizations.
EPE, association d'une
You're all familiar, I
soixantaine
think, with
de grandes entreprises de tous les secteurs
EPE
qui sont
has
engagées
approximately
depuis
60
plus de 30 ans
members.
maintenant dans la
They
transition.
have
Et
engaged,
qui a mis
been committed
EPE ces
for
questions
30
très tôt,
years,
finalement à son
and
agenda. Et
realized
avec
the
les
importance
changements
of all those
climatiques qui
questions very
s'accélèrent,
early,
la
with
perte de la
accelerating
biodiversité, les
climate change,
crises
the loss of
qui secouent nos
biodiversity,
modèles, l'urgence à agir se
crises
fait, on peut le dire, je pense,
around the
de
globe
plus en plus pressante.
are making
Et l'action
the
volontaire
agenda
individuelle ne
more and
suffit plus
more
manifestement.
urgent.
C'est donc
And
un effort collectif qui
we
nous est demandé
need to
pour y
make
parvenir, un
collective
effort qui est
efforts.
nécessaire. Et c'est la raison pour
Necessary
laquelle
collective
ici, chez
efforts.
nous,
And
en
this
France,
is
les
why
entreprises engagées
we, here
ensemble
at
dans
home in
l'EPE
France,
ont décidé
with the members of
de
EPE,
réfléchir à
we
comment elles allaient
decided
essayer de
to
faire ça
see
ensemble, justement. Que
what
faudrait-il avoir
could be
fait
done,
particulièrement
what
d'ici
can be done,
2030?
what should be done
L'échéance est
between
importante
now and
pour nous mettre
2030
collectivement sur une
to put us
trajectoire de transition écologique qui
on
soit
this
cohérente avec les engagements et surtout
trajectory,
qui soit socialement
a
acceptée,
consistent,
voire qui fait
coherent,
peut-être même
and socially
désirée.
accepted
Quelles priorités
trajectory.
mettre en œuvre durant
What
ces toutes prochaines années,
priorities
dès aujourd'hui, avant
are necessary
2030?
now,
Quels leviers
before
aussi actionner
2030,
pour
and what
qu'elles ne
else
soient pas
can
finalement
be
que
done
des mots?
to
Cette accélération
translate
collective, elle
words
est ébauchée
into
dans l'étude que
actions.
nous allons ensemble
We're going
découvrir ce soir
to
ici.
share a study
Été
with you,
2030, été pour étape 2030 de la transition écologique, bien sûr. Et vous allez voir
which
que
is
c'est en
a step
s'appuyant tout particulièrement sur les
towards
constatations des
the
scientifiques,
environmental transition. It is inspired by scientific data coming from IPCC and a number of other reports, roughly 100 reports that have been compiled into this report. So let's discover together how corporate organizations are accelerating their ecological transition. To get started, I'm going to ask the chairman of EP to please join me. Please welcome Patrick Pouyanné.
Bonsoir, bonsoir à tous. Merci d'être là.
Good evening, everyone. I think the number of participants alone is a success and a good sign. We've been working on this study for over a year, and EPE is a group of large companies, French companies that have been working on environmental questions, sustainable development questions. We now talk more about the ecological transition, which shows that there is growing awareness. So all together, we are trying to improve this transition, this ecological and environmental transition. It is my pleasure to chair it for 1 year. It's fairly short, and the EPE represents different sectors. Jean-Laurent Bonafé, before me, was representing the financial industry. We're trying to make it a true collective effort. So we're going to share the study, the ETE 2030 study. We're going to see what it involves, and it comes after another study called Zen 2050 about a carbon-neutral France. This study was published in 2019. It was a first step towards 2050. And this study showed that collectively it was possible to reach carbon neutrality in a way compatible with modern comfort and with prosperity and employment. This study showed this very clearly. And EPE is not a closed circle. We try to be as open as possible to other stakeholders, and we used the same methodology again for this new study, ETE 2030. Why 2030? Well, as we all know, and you've probably heard about COP28, we all agree that 2050, we all agree on what should be done by 2050, but we are finding it more difficult to agree on faster initiatives, the ones that should be accomplished by 2030. So we're now well into this decade before 2030. What concretely should be done? What efforts are necessary to put us on the right path, on a path that is ecologically acceptable and compatible with the limits of our planet? I think we've all come to realize and recognize that the planet has its limits, and this has ramifications in the field of health, biodiversity. It's not just about climate change, but really we would like to have a more holistic ways of meeting the 2030 challenge. So the deadline is 2030. It's not far. It's relatively close to us. What are the stakes? Climate, biodiversity, health, adaptation, building collective solutions, recognizing the social dimensions, social acceptance, which is important, and those who made this study also realized it was important to make trade-offs, to compromise. There is not one single or one-fits-all solution. We need to find synergies and we need trade-offs. They also looked beyond the first circle of companies. We need all stakeholders, including the public authorities, employees, the general public, and so on. So how can we get all those stakeholders together, and how can we build the right solutions collectively? This is what we will explore this evening. So we've integrated scientific data, social and economic data. We've discussed them and will discuss them with all stakeholders, and at that point we're going to identify what priorities we think we should focus on first. So we're going to give you a bit of a glimpse. We have an article which was signed by 60 CEOs and corporate leaders, business leaders, members of EPE, but not only, including some future EPE members. And we are making a call. We're asking companies to take action with the society, with citizens, and with the public authorities. We're going to show you a quick video just to give you a bit of a flavor, just to take you all on board. And I would like to thank all the speakers, my colleagues, CEOs who are here. I think your presence is a sign of collective commitment. I'm glad EPE has been so successful this evening in bringing us all together. This collective effort, I hope, will inspire us, will inspire you. We need to build a positive narrative, a positive narrative with constraints, but eventually there are positive triggers, and hopefully they can help us find a better economy, including a circular economy, in order to collectively work for a better and prosperous world. Again, I'd like to thank Raphaël Duchemin for being our MC this evening. It's going to be a 30.
Vous avez presque tout dit, alors je vous propose qu'on regarde effectivement en images ce que donne ce fameux rapport.
You've said it all, so let's take a look at what this report is all about.
Vous avez les grandes lignes qui sont tracées, qui viennent d'apparaître sous vos yeux. On a vu le mot collaboratif apparaître, on a vu le mot ensemble apparaître, et on va décliner justement ensemble les différents.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the various priorities shown in the report. But first, let me be a little bit specific before we move on to the panelists. Provided we have time after the first panel discussion, we will be able to take questions from the audience. You have sheets of paper that were handed out to you on your seats, and you can put your questions in writing, and time permitting, we can respond to some of those questions. Okay, so much for the housekeeping. And now let's move on to the meeting of the matter. Estelle Brankeko, François Clément Goncourt, and Boutana Araki, thank you for being with us. Together, we're going to build this shared vision of a transition. Transition is, of course, quite necessary, and as Patrick Pouyanné said, we all have our own perception of what this transition should be. So how are we going to move to a more shared vision to enable players to work in the same direction more effectively? We all have our own habits, our own behavioral patterns, and so on. Maybe we could change for the sake of the planet. So we are all certain that there is a need for transition. Now we have to build a shared vision of what transition should be all about, and it has to be organized as efficiently as possible. Such is the theme of this panel discussion, building a shared vision of transition. First, we have to consider sobriety in the long term. Turning to you, Estelle Bacchero. So the main issue, or the main challenge, is reducing our impact on the environment. Actually, there are 4 or 5 times too many emissions for each French person. So, in other words, we have to come back to the limits imposed by the planet. This calls for significant efforts, individual efforts, collective efforts, and the aim, of course, is to consider sobriety in terms of still using resources. Is that correct? Well, the paper that was handed out is recyclable, by the way. So please feel free to use those sheets of paper. And we do recycle paper. But more seriously now, sobriety, you say. Well, sobriety involves a moral obligation, a duty, and so on. If it's based on that only, we won't go very far. Then we can speak about effective and efficient use of resources. Sobriety could consist in disconnecting industrial production, population growth from the use of natural resources. That would be more relevant, but I prefer a third definition. The IPCC does not speak about sobriety as such. They speak about sufficiency. Now, sufficiency consists in using just what is necessary based on what we need, and no more than that. There's even a word in Japanese, shigoi. It's the elegance of the right form that does not consume too much. It's the opposite of too much, you see. So just what is needed with a little bit of elegance and even aesthetics, and that would be the best way to define sobriety. And it also involves projects for society. It involves health care, a better society, a more peaceful society, and quite a few recent surveys point to that there are co-benefits. It's not only good for the planet, it can be good for life in society as well. Oh, yes, sobriety is something that people actually carry out. We saw this with the energy restrictions with the war on Ukraine last winter in France. So how can we make it more acceptable and more desirable? I'm not saying that no effort should be made, but all surveys do show, especially in France, that people need to be in a position to understand what the future should be out. Efforts have to be evenly distributed. People are also sick and tired of efforts that will solve 0.001% of the problems. They have to be told about benefits, and they have to have a tangible perception of what the future is going to be like. We need a desirable future, and we have to make efforts. Another essential word is being consistent and sensible. We have to be consistent with the legislative framework, and we have to consider that everything has to go together. Now, there's public purchasing, public tendering, which doesn't always make very good sense. Sometimes there are some contradictory requirements there, and public tendering should consider climate change and sobriety to a greater extent in places placing orders. For example, value rather than volume. For instance, we have a water contract in Lille at Veolia. We are compensated when we achieve water-related savings. So it's about sobriety. It involves leak detection with AI and so on, but it's brand new. So make business models consistent with value rather than volume, and there's a lot to be done in that regard. An interesting example, thank you, because that is what the survey points to. What should our collective lifestyle be, and what can be built in that regard by companies? Yes, a collective way of life involves the planet, children, it has to do with health care, comfort, lifestyle, and so on. It has to do with fairness. And can we do this with affordable energy? Well, we're here to discuss energy in every stripe, notably the energy that we need to deploy individually and collectively. Okay, let's take a look at what things are, what is done in our corporations. There's the trajectory, and there's the informants in every industry, and indeed in every company. So I'm turning to you, the ecological transition has to be implemented. You moved on to practical matters with lighters in a closed circuit system with a whole ecosystem that involves NGOs, various stakeholders, and so on in the production, and of course your employees. Well, yes, why the lighter? Well, it's a pilot for the big group, and we started this 7 years ago. We started working on 2030-2050 roadmaps in concrete terms. And interestingly, the work that was done with researchers and with our staff in-house, this work has led us to a simple conclusion. It is possible from an operational standpoint and from a financial standpoint as well. I didn't say it was easy, but it's possible. It's interesting to see that since we started, things have changed considerably. A year and a half or 2 years ago, the media would tell us that, well, 45+% of CAC 40 companies could go for a 250 euro a ton carbon tax. Today, several CEOs say it is possible. Nexans produces cables. Mrs. McGregor in early December also said it is possible, and that is our conclusion as well. So what is the role of this survey here? Well, it's quite exciting because it has been a spark. It has really pushed our limits, and this survey and EPE, through positive experience sharing and negative experience sharing, can be very valuable as well, because with all this, we can avoid problems that have been identified by others. Now, for instance, if you take the method used by Nexans, in the end, the conclusion that we reach for lighters is exactly the same. The method is the same. So, is there a set of rules, simple rules, that would help reach the transition? I don't know. It's hard to say so. Interesting thing to consider that quite often there are companies that have facilities and own engineering facilities And this gives you very quick experience feedback, and it's a very quick learning curve if you have everything in-house. And what if we discovered that the new corporate cycles could lead us to bringing in or inshoring some of our operations? And yes, it can work in consumer products and in heavy industry. Well, yes, the method described by Christopher Guérin for Nexans, it's B2B in the cable industry. The method is the same that the one we work with in lighters. Yeah, I find this rather interesting. But is it more expensive? I'll speak about costs only. I won't speak about benefits in terms of market share and so on. It is more expensive. Yes, that's our conclusion. I can't quantify this for you right now. But it's manageable, definitely manageable.
Est-ce que, et dites-moi si c'est un préalable, est-ce qu'il faut, quand on part dans cette démarche, identifier en interne les endroits sur lesquels il faut identify areas that should be
priorities? How do you do it?
La première étape, ça a été de mettre les équipes en mouvement. Et je vais être très honnête, mes premiers mouvements étaient complètement idiots. Mais ça a mis les équipes en mouvement.
Started moving, got the wheels in motion, but very inefficiently. But it got the wheels in motion, the staff in motion, and when we really started designing the roadmaps, we realized there were a few pillars there, and the teams were already in motion, and then we got them moving in certain areas. So it was trial and error, and that is where sharing errors can be valuable because it makes for faster learning. Yes, we have to learn how to operate differently, and this is of concern to all industries today. We have to act differently, we have to operate differently, and we have to publicize things. And this is
une des clés de cette étude. Boutaina Araki, vos prédécesseurs
where Boutaina Araki can tell us about publicity and communications. Sometimes they say that green products don't sell as well and so on. How can one reinvent ways of consuming, and how can we figure that transition is not going to be, a punishment or something negative moving forward? Yes, all that is key. Advertising, the media play a fundamental role in all this. Well, advertising has been around for 80 or 100 years and has played a considerable role in our behavior and our consumption. We're at a juncture now, because we do outdoor advertising and our audience is everyone. It may be the very last mass media, apart from television maybe, but anyway. So we advertise outdoors, and advertising and its influence can be used to design a different form of imagination. What does this mean? Well, we have to spur the desire, a sense of longing. If the ecological transition is considered as a constraint or a sacrifice, things will not change easily. So people act more with a sense of desire than with a sense of sacrifice. And advertising in that regard is very important because it helps shape a different form of imagination. Advertising can make things sexy, if I may say so. And one of our challenges is to make green mobility sexy, reasonable consumption sexy. You used the Japanese word, which shows the aesthetics of consumption, which helps us step away from abundance to move on to something more elegant, which is also beneficial from an individual or collective standpoint. And as I see it, advertising can play that important role. And when you speak about the media, as in other industry, we have scopes 1, 2, and 3, and so on. But the brass tacks is not so much reducing emissions in scopes 1, 2, or 3. We all do that. But the challenge is in scope 4. And scope 4 has to do with the impact on biodiversity or on various resource limits and so on when a message is conveyed by the media. And what should the priority be for the media? And we believe that we have to contribute to telling another story, make people have another form of imagination and shape their own desires. And the stories told have to be compatible with the limits of the planet. And what are the ideas that are put forth by this collective team of EP? What are the levers? You said that your business is outdoor advertising and the construction of these messages. This is clearly quite important. This is where you can make things change. Yes, absolutely. We are part of a broad team, in the media industry. So we're looking at a transformation pathway with various stakeholders. One of them are the advertisers who imagine the solutions of the future. So that has to be focused on in this whole communications industry. The advertisers, the media agencies, the media, and the consumers. Obviously, this is in connection with our staff and our shareholders, and it's also connected to actors in the public space. I say the public authorities, the cities where we advertise. So this is where we can all work together in order to consider things with a new sense of responsibility. Estelle, well, I'd like to speak about automobiles, if I may, as a consumer. When I drive an electric car, I love it because it has pep and it's nice and clean and it's silent. And you don't really see that in ads for electric cars. It is hopefully a little bit better for the planet, but the co-benefits have to be described. So this is a challenge for the media expert. But if there was advertising for cars with those benefits extolled, I'd be happy. I agree. So we advertise, we do advertising for plenty of advertisers, small and large, and all these players are involved in a low carbon trajectory. And they do still advertise for some products that are not quite as virtuous. So we have to tell different stories, and we have to point to new kinds of products. How can we give room in mass media to industrial organizations that are currently inventing new products, blue jeans that have not traveled that much, things are produced locally, and so on. The idea is to spur the right form of desire for new kinds of solutions that are respectful of the planet and that will make it possible to shift. We have to give people good solutions, convenient solutions. Yes, what you're saying is quite important because we have to make room for these new alternatives. So now let me turn to the people over there in the shadows, the people who are picking up the recyclable sheets of paper there. Do we have any questions from the audience at this point?
Yes, I have a quick piece of information first. We have little baskets in the room. Please do not hesitate to drop your questions in the basket. We have one question at this point. It's in English. So to reach the necessary reductions by 2030, we need to go at a pace of about 10% per year. Is that doable? Is that doable for the companies represented today? As far as we're concerned, the answer is yes. I'm not the biggest industrial company, but the answer for us is yes. I guess it very much depends on the nature of your industry. Yes. The objective for us, for lighters, is to stick to the IPCC directions, and we're on track. Veolia, we have our own impact scopes 1, 2, and 3. We're on the right trajectory, compatible with what you just said, but we're in a very unique industry in the sense that our job is also to help customers decarbonate. So we measure our own trajectory, and we obviously want to reduce our own emissions, but we also have scope 4, which is the trajectory of our customers. And the better we do there, 14 million tons that we removed, that we eliminated last year alone for our customers. I think we're over time, we're right on time, and I want to stick to the time. Thank you so much to all three.
Je vous laisse regagner la salle. Et on va évidemment continuer dans quelques instants parce que vous le savez,
in a moment, we're going to continue. In order to tick all the boxes, we have a lot of work ahead. We need to respect the limits of our planet. When you look at everything we have to accomplish by 2030, which is the deadline, to be in a credible ecological transition trajectory, there are going to be priorities, very specific priorities. To address those, I'm going to call Thomas Buberl, Thierry Blandinière, and Sébastien Petit-Huguenin.
Messieurs, bonsoir.
Gentlemen, good evening.
Vous êtes normalement rangés dans l'ordre sous vos
You should be in the right order, right under the names that are on the screen.
Cette transition dont on parle tous
So we're all
tout à l'heure,
we've been talking about this transition. We're going to have to make it desirable and financially speaking, doable. Thomas Buberl, this transition requires efforts, including financial efforts. If we want it to be sustainable, we need a long-term vision, a financial vision. It's true for companies, but it's also true for households. What does that really mean? Does it mean we need to double investments? Has the study looked at this specifically? Have you identified exactly what should be done and what kind of measures should be implemented to limit the expenses? Well, I think that the financial aspects are complicated, especially given the fact interest rates have increased. When you look at the marginal cost of new technologies and the price of existing technologies, you can see that how complex it is. Once again, interest rates have increased. We're no longer living in a world with interest rates at zero, so this has been a blocking factor, but I think we have to look beyond. We also have to look at the cost of not taking action. When you add up all the costs, including external costs, externalities, well, you quickly realize you have no choice. We have no choice. And this is why we, as investors, need to combine classic investments, but also with investments for and in the transition. We need to make sure that we're truly focused on this transition. To give you a concrete example, we exited coal fairly easily. We've transferred a lot of amounts towards green investments. You know, I remember having this conversation. How do we offset? How do we compensate the wonderful yields of coal? Well, that was before. Today, it's no longer a question. Green investments are possibly have become more interesting than coal, and the same thing is now probably true in other transition investments. So when you talk about investments, I imagine you talk about massive investments. How do you make priorities? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think investments need to be doubled by 2 in the next 10 years in order to actually pay for the ecological transition. That is correct. We're only at the beginning of this journey. I've seen a lot of declarations, statements of intention, of different investments, but there has been little action. Time has now come for action. We cannot just make long lists of future actions or wish lists. We now must take action to move on. I also believe that governments, states, need to play a more active role. Instead of simply focusing on classifying investments, as we're doing in Europe with the European taxonomy, we need to find the right incentives for corporate organizations, financial organizations, a bit like with the IRA in the US. It's something that can very well be duplicated, copied in Europe. Take my industry. We have Solvency II in my industry, and I'm very disappointed to see that it's very difficult to direct current financial flows towards transition rather than giving no orientations. So I think we could do a lot more, a lot better, especially when it comes to private-public partnerships. So you just mentioned your company. AXA is an insurance company, but also an investment company. To make this transition affordable, we need to de-risk. De-risking is a topic you know very well, you know inside out. What does that mean? Does it mean we need to anticipate, be more proactive on what could happen, be more proactive when it comes to the supply chain, supply of raw materials? This is exactly it. And this is doable. We're investors. We make long-term investments, and we know exactly what we need and how we need to make the investments and how we need to plan those investments. So it is doable, but what we need is the right incentives, especially from the state. We need to direct financial flows, and we need the right incentives to engage in new technologies. Is this the only solution to develop solutions that work? Well, yes, it's the only solution. But there is another important question. How do we better manage the social consequences of this? we have a role to play, a societal role to play. So far, we took about financing and how corporate organizations need to play a role, but we also need to support society at large. Clearly, not everyone can afford to pay for this, and states have reduced financial means today versus 10 years ago. What can and what should be the role of states? And what do we consider politically and socially fair also? The question is also what states can do to support corporate organizations. At AXA, for example, we need to see what we can do in the field of social inclusion. Approximately 20% of the French are either excluded or they're not exactly our target audience. How do we put these folks back on a better journey? And this is where private-public partnerships can play an essential role. I think we're only at the very beginning of this journey. Right, as long as it doesn't add an additional burden. Thank you so much. We're going to go through the different projects. There is one which keeps making the headlines, which is mobility. How do we reduce the mobility, the mobility constraint? Probably one of the biggest challenges, one which is probably best known by the general public. We talked about the electric vehicle earlier. We talked about environmentally friendly mobility. Some people claim there is no affordable alternative. How do we create those alternatives? Pascal Imbert, what if they came too late? Well, I think your question has multiple dimensions. This is a very complex topic. We can only, I think, find solutions in the long term. We need to create more verticalization to avoid urban sprawl. These are, public, important and public decisions that must be made, and they will pay off. They will only materialize in a few decades. So how do we accelerate this movement? Well, first of all, by all moving into the same direction. And then the next question is, are there more short-term decisions that should be made to for better mobility? And the answer is, yes, there are solutions. Some solutions exist. Some of them are technological solutions, and they have a positive impact on mobility. We, as a company, we're a factor of mobility. Our employees come to work. They have to commute back and forth to come to work. So it is a forced form of mobility. Wavestone is a consulting firm. Therefore, we do a lot of traveling. We meet with customers. We have to go to their locations. Our employees do a lot of travel. Our employees otherwise go to our offices, have to commute back and forth to our offices. Thanks to home officing, thanks to technologies and hybrid meetings, thanks to a new corporate travel policy. We, in a few years, between 2019 and 2023, we reduced the CO2 footprint of our employees by 40%. And there is room for progress. when you take the carbon budget and you look at which ones really create value for customers, well, we know there is room for progress. And in some countries, the level of awareness is not the same when it comes to CO2 emissions. So we have additional tools and levers we can and must use, new technologies, and also from an organizational standpoint. So you just mentioned technology. Electric vehicles are a real industrial challenge, and there's been a lot of progress already. Another issue is charging facilities, charging equipment. That's one question, and then the other question is how do we make electric vehicles more affordable? You're absolutely right. We have a technology challenge and an industrial challenge. 5 years ago, this challenge was very difficult to overcome. Today, we're about to do it successfully. The industry is now strong. The question is not whether the future is a future of electric vehicles. The question is when and who will sell the electric vehicles, who will make them, who will sell those vehicles. These are the real questions. But we think this is going to have a substantial impact on CO2 emissions. I can still see two hurdles, affordability and stimulating demand. Adopting new products, switching to new products is not easy. It takes time. It takes a lot of convincing. And then, as you said, another issue is the infrastructures, the charging facilities that are still lacking. Companies have an essential role to play. 50% of new vehicles are purchased by companies. They're corporate fleets, company fleets. 50%, one vehicle in two. Or it's leasing. The vehicles are leased. So this means that companies can really contribute and accelerate the number of electric vehicles. We could very quickly go from 10% EVs to 50% EVs. 3 years after buying vehicles, they become second-hand vehicles, and this means that very quickly we could change our practices and thereby boost the EV business. We also need incentives coming from the public authorities. I forgot to switch off my phone. I'm sorry. Sorry, it's probably my wife asking me to go to the bakery, which I will do, taking my electric vehicle when we're done. Back to charging units. I think this is a massive challenge. And the question is who will address this challenge? It's going to be a combination of public authorities, European authorities, private organizations. We're going to have to standardize. I don't think things are going fast enough. And there is a need to standardize. And I think to overcome this one hurdle, we're going to need strong signals of massive deployment of charging units. A lot of companies already have obligations to install charging units in their parking lots. I think we can go further and really make a difference and help our employees buy electric vehicles. And we can make we can also encourage other means of transportation. There are different types of mobility packages that are developed by companies to encourage employees to travel differently. Okay, we'll come back to forced mobility a bit later. We'll see how much work has already been accomplished. Thank you, Pascal Imbert. Turning now to Benoît Bazin. How can we renovate homes? This is also a massive project. How do we modify, renovate existing buildings? How do we build better buildings? How do we organize this massive renovation project?
Alors c'est vrai que le monde de la construction, il est véritablement au carrefour
Well, I think
à la fois des sujets
the construction
environnementaux,
industry
des sujets
is
énergétiques,
at a
des sujets
watershed,
sociaux, donc il
working
est au centre de cette transition
with several
juste qu'on appelle
priorities.
de nos voeux. Quelques chiffres.
Climate
Le
transition.
monde du bâtiment, il représente en France plus de 30% des émissions de CO2.
Buildings represent more than 30% of CO2 emissions in France, which means it's the problem, but it's also the solution. We have nearly 5 million buildings that are very poorly insulated and that generate, therefore, a lot of CO2. We need to go from 60,000 renovations to 200,000 next year.
Ces passoires thermiques en 2030, il faut passer à 600,
But
700 000.
if we wish to finish the work by 2030, we need to go much faster, 650,000 housing units per year. There's too much energy being wasted in buildings, public and private buildings. So the construction industry has a key role to play. There are also multiple benefits because it is healthier for the people who live in those buildings. It will lower absenteeism. If you live in a healthy house, you're less likely to be sick. It also answers the question of energy precarity. When you live in a house that has been renovated well, you can divide your energy bill by 4 or 5. It costs about 300 euros per square meter, which is not too costly, and it will actually boost the value of your property. As you know, if your property is not well insulated, it will not sell well. The industry has a lot of inertia. We're talking about 35 million buildings. 85% of them have to be renovated, and we need a lot of stability and visibility to do this. And let's not forget about public buildings. 70% of public buildings are health or education.
Des domaines où ces emplois sont difficiles, sont contraignants. On en manque d'ailleurs, et donc avoir aussi un cadre de vie acceptable et respecté peut être aussi un facteur important.
Welcoming working environment for those who work in schools, hospitals, healthcare facilities, and so on. So the study shows that we need to globally renovate all homes and buildings, and it mentions an extension of obligations. What does that mean, and how do you think this could have a positive impact on the planet and on people? And once again, how can we make this socially acceptable by homeowners, for example? Well, I think we need subsidies. A lot of households cannot afford. They have to choose. Either they have to decide to either eat or have a comfortable home, but they can't do both. So we need to focus primarily on the buildings that are rated F or G. They need subsidies. Low-income households need the highest subsidies, either because they rent or because they're homeowners that they cannot afford to renovate, so they need to receive subsidies first. So those mechanisms have to be created first. Looking at the price of energy, the return on investment is anywhere between 4 and 5 years. But we need incentives, financial incentives. In France, we now have MaPrimeInnov. It's a little complicated, but it has been simplified. I think we need to make it very, very simple. I think it is possible. The good news is that it is possible. There is a parliamentary report which talks about very high numbers of bonuses that could be distributed in the next years. And the returns on investments are very obvious. So once again, this will play an essential role in changing in our energy transition.
Vous parliez des déchets, justement. Comment est-ce qu'on va accélérer peut-être la structuration de la filière, des filières professionnelles,
better manage the waste
et aussi celle du réemploi pour les matériaux.
Industry? How do you
c'est une condition sine qua non aussi.
Recycle construction materials and so on?
Depuis le 1er mai 2023, la REP, la responsabilité étendue des producteurs, qui nous oblige à récupérer, j'appelle pas ça les déchets, mais les matériaux
held accountable.
Comme ça, on a une
And
meilleure
when you
image.
renovate a home,
Nous avons déjà 70%
anything
de
that you
matériaux
demolish needs to be, all the material needs to be recycled. We today sell products that are made with up to 50% of recycled products. So there's been real progress there. It's okay to reuse. We now have a legal framework to do this. All we need is visibility, we need stability, we need support mechanisms, we need the right legislation as well. And I think with this new regulation, France is very much ahead of other European countries when it comes to the transposition of European regulations. We have a massive plan, a 2 billion plan for schools for the next 2 years, with a focus also on the circular economy, which I think is very positive.
So we already ticked quite a few boxes with the first three panelists. Let's continue because it all has to do with biodiversity and nature in general. So Thierry Blandinière, we're going to give you the floor because among the priorities, well, there's biodiversity and the protection of nature. The survey points to this to a great extent. So resources have to be used differently and farming models have to be changed. Their biodiversity is plummeting and nearly half of our impact on nature comes from imports. How can this be reduced? The challenges are daunting when it comes to farming. You have to produce more. There will be 10 billion people on the planet soon. How can you feed them? So it's a daunting challenge. And at the same time, how can we try to produce more and demonstrate that farming can be part of the solution in the face of climate change? And here we have to consider different kinds of farming. Of course, there's local farming, which is very sensible, short circuits and so on. They have to be developed, extended in numbers and so on. And this will solve 5 to 10% of the problem when it comes to global food. But actually, it all comes to cereal, grain. If you take a look at this from a geopolitical standpoint, it's very daunting. And France and Europe will have a say in developing sustainable grain moving forward with better farming practices, regenerative farming that can become carbon wells that can provide additional income to farmers, 250 euros a ton, that would be great, with a carbon tax, because how can the transition be funded in actual fact? Well, we ran pilots, we have farmers who are involved in all this, and we know what is at stake economically when it comes to funding the transition. A few figures, if I may. When you look at turnover of crops, when you grow grain and you also grow vegetables and so on, you can enrich the soil. It creates biomass, and the soil becomes a carbon well. So the farmers must be convinced to rotate their crops, and when you do that, in the first 5 years, there is a drop in income. That is the problem. If we want to change our food patterns, you have to convince the farmers to go towards regenerative farming. Yes, that is it, because things are very splintered all over the world now. How can you convince 80% of these farmers who are independent in an organized, no-nonsense way? Incentives are necessary, public policies and so on. There's the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe, and industrial firms have to accept to pay an additional price for the sake of transition and to show that there will be value creation in the end for them. And in fact, it's quite simple. You have to consider 200 euros per hectare per year over a period of 5 years. How can you do that? Well, there are 3 ways to go. Incentives, as I mentioned, carbon credit, price of carbon, that's a source of income. Plenty of people are in favor of that, I'm sure, and public policy. So, in other words, the Common Agricultural agricultural policy has to fund this transition one way or another. It has done so with organic food, 300 euros per hectare. That has to be funded now on a large scale. We have to fund the major transition and solve. So we have to produce more in a sustainable way and with better quality. So moving forward, premium grain, wheat, maize, and so on should have a price difference. So at the European level, it is possible. We're looking at 4 million tons. We're moving forward by 2030. It does seem possible.
Mais pas plus quelque part. Et si effectivement on voit que l'agriculteur s'y retrouve, la trajectoire peut être exponentielle.
If the farmers understand there's something in it for them, it can be exponential. So natural resources are at stake.
Comment est-ce que vous allez réussir?
How are you going to succeed collectively in meeting these needs without increasing the pressure exerted on biodiversity? Well, the challenge is that we have plenty of innovation in farming, and we can reduce the impact of farming quite considerably. You can use the right dose of input products and make considerable savings. So we can demonstrate that it is possible. It is possible to lower the impact of the input materials, but everybody has to be involved in this. So once again, it boils down to public policy. We need Farm to Fork, a policy that was on a European level that leads to degrowth, and that has to be improved for the sake of funding transition to increase volume while reducing the impact on the environment. It is possible. Yes, the phrase has been used several times. It is possible. Okay, so speaking about the circular economy, and then we will have come full circle here. How can we tick all the boxes of the transition? Of course, we have to consume differently, whether it comes to raw materials or finished products. The circular economy is necessarily part of the solution here. EPE is convinced that the deployment of the circular economy is absolutely necessary, and there's a rather striking figure that we could reduce the volume of our waste and our dependency on imports by 40% by deploying the circular economy. So what do we have to do? Change our behavioral patterns, our consumption habits, and so on, or production, or both? Well, many things have to be changed. But one of the major conclusions of the survey is the importance of recycling. Well, there are two pillars that make it possible to make this dream come true. Green growth. Progress environmentalists dream of that. That is what EP is all about. These are people who care for the environment in a liberal way, in an inventive way. And we have two pillars to achieve the circular economy. First of all, recycling, take out the raw materials from waste, and also when you increase consumption too much, there are many problems that arise. So the recycling is at the heart of the solution here. That is how green growth can be accomplished. And we believe in the possibility of achieving green growth. So in a nutshell, why is this one of the conclusions of the survey? Well, when you recycle, this is scope 4 that you mentioned earlier, you save CO2 CO2 massively. That's what it's all about. When you talk about natural materials, whether renewable or fossil, the whole transformation change that is transform this into a finished product. When you start with the waste, you keep part of the transformation energy. You preserve part of what you've used, which is why the recycling change is far leaner. And when you replace materials from materials that are recyclable, renewable or fossil, you cut emissions quite significantly. When you recycle, you can reduce your energy consumption up to 60%. And that is why there's a huge opportunity in recycling. And that is what lies ahead. It's a great opportunity. Yes, thank you for underscoring that aspect of the survey, because moving forward, will we force companies to factor in recycled materials? Is that how we're going to minimize the impact on the environment? While shouldn't pull the wool over our eyes, obligations are emerging, but they're already here, part of the European regulations that recommend 25% of mandatory recycled materials in plastic containers and 30% in 2030. There's the PPWR directive, which is being discussed, which will define mandatory content. And with Bernard Bazin, we work in partnership when it comes to gypsum plasterboard. But some industrial firms have said we are going to incorporate recycled materials massively above and beyond regulatory requirements. But that is why we should not be afraid of these obligations. And this will enhance sobriety, because if we have to massively factor in recycled materials, we're going to have to pay attention to lean production. And the obligations are already in force. They're going to take up speed. And the companies have considered this is not a constraint but an opportunity, and who are already in motion to be ahead of the regulations are going to come out as winners. But the regulations, through bonuses or obligations of incorporation, create an economic framework that is beneficial for those who have a virtuous behavior. And we have achieved that in certain areas, but not all of them. Yes, you took the example of gypsum plasterboard. Another good example is a recent collaboration with Gerflor, flooring products. So as you work with industries that you're not used to working with and come up with a new model. Yes, interestingly, one of the keys of decarbonization is eco-design. Actually, it should be design for recycling. Eco-design can have several aspects, but if you consider the end of life of the product for recycling purposes, that is going to achieve savings in energy and it'll be less costly. And in the design stage, you have to consider the end of life for effective recycling. That is the question. And the example of our partnership with Gerflor is this. Gerflor is fully involved in this, and they move on to over 80% of materials from recycling. That is what transformation should be. More and more recycled materials, and you have to change your production facilities, and that is what Gerflor has decided to do with us. Economically, it makes very good sense. They have stabilized the price of the materials they use, and with the energy crisis, it's been very useful for them to adapt. Okay, as you've all said, It is possible. In attendance, we have experts who are paying close attention to every word you say. So I'm going to ask the first expert to come up here, Gilles Bloch, who is the president of the French National Natural History Museum.
A donné un exercice difficile, Monsieur Bloch, ce soir,
Mr. Bloch,
de résumer en quelque sorte et de faire ce
you
rapport
are given the
d'étonnement de
daunting
ce qui vous a marqué.
task of summarize all this. Were you startled to hear that the survey is based on scientific observations? Did you find this surprising? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very much impressed by these eminent speakers from the French economy. Benoit Bazin and I were saying that it's very reassuring to see that companies use scientific knowledge to design solutions. The challenges we face are extremely complex. They are multifaceted, considering both the environment and socioeconomic issues. We, in our museum, focus on life and biodiversity. Also, we're interested in geodiversity as well. And if the impact of our operations is not documented, we will not move in the right direction. So it is reassuring to see that science remains a beacon in the dark. Okay? In what you've heard, you see that we did speak about biodiversity. My question is, do you think that the trajectory is good, and how can we effectively change our relation to life? Well, there are two levels of action. First of all, awareness, individual awareness, corporate awareness, and voters or consumers' awareness. And that is one of the key missions of our museum and other institutions. Our mission is to feed the public with knowledge about how fast biodiversity is depleting. I could give you many, many figures, but let me just give you two that are not very well known. Fish species who migrate between lakes and the ocean, 46% of those species are extinct or considerably threatened. Another one. Bats, which are not often mentioned. Bats are very important animals when it comes to removing mosquitoes in damp areas. 43% are lost, so it's a total bat collapse. And awareness is becoming more and more critical, and awareness, nevertheless, needs to be extended. Efforts must be made to preserve the biodiversity, and that has to be known. And companies are major players when it comes to exerting pressure on biodiversity, of course, by destroying habitat, by pollution, by emitting CO2, obviously. And obviously, in corporate policies, there have to be instruments to locally and nationally measure the impact on biodiversity. So, along with other key players, we supply economic players with practical tools to take stock of the impact of your operations at local and national level, and international level, of course. Just 10 days ago, with a partner, Carbon 4, we launched a piece of work on biodiversity certificates that would make it possible for companies to scientifically, rationally quantify the contribution that they can make on biodiversity by taking a number of very good measures. Are there challenges that have not been taken up? Are there challenges that have been just broached upon? Well, first I'd like to congratulate the authors of the survey. 2030 is a very good deadline. We don't have much time to act. Life is depleting and is collapsing dramatically. We cannot afford to wait. So there's one item that may not be sufficiently underscored. It is the impact that the deterioration of biodiversity will have on human health. The COVID crisis has shown the extent that of the damage that a virus can have when it goes from one species, animal species, to humans. And mental health is also critical in all this. We are disconnecting from the animal world, and that is wrong. So that is maybe something that has to be taken into consideration. It is featured in the report, and maybe we will have the opportunity to speak about it later on this evening. So thank you so much, Gilles Bloch, for your input.
Alors, je précise que nous n'avons pas pris de questions.
Okay, we did not take any questions, but bear in mind that all the questions will be forwarded to the EPE staff, and you will be given responses one way or another. It's work in progress.
Soyez sans crainte. On va regarder, parce que c'est la troisième phase et c'est peut-être la phase essentielle aussi, comment on va mobiliser l'ensemble des acteurs.
And it has to do with how the various players should be mobilized. We spoke about collective efforts, and in order to run all these ecological transition projects, mobilization is critical, and of course it's a cross-cutting requirement. Ecological planning should not be top-down only. Individual initiatives, bottom-up, are not enough either, nor are corporate strategies. Rather, we have to look on co-building strategies with collective authorities, citizens, communities, and so on, and so forth, the various components of society. How can all this be accomplished? These are the questions that we will put to Philippe Maillard, Jean-Marc Aulagnier, Patrick Koller, and Catherine McGregor.
Je vous laisse nous rejoindre. Prenez votre temps. Nous sommes à peu près dans les temps. C'est un
Okay, we're more or less on time. I guess we met that challenge, or we're about to. Philippe Maillard, I'm going to start with you to prepare the future. A lot will need to change. A lot of practices will need to change. Some industries will survive, others will emerge, some will disappear. I think ADEME identified that there will be nearly 1 million new jobs by 2050, which means a lot of adaptability. It means training, lifelong training in companies, and it will probably require a lot of anticipation.
Oui, bonsoir
We
à
need to
toutes et
be
à tous.
prepared,
Ça a été
right?
beaucoup évoqué.
Absolutely.
Parle de passer
We've
à l'action.
spoken about this a lot.
Et en fait, pour
Everybody
réussir
keeps saying we need
cette
to now
transition, il faut
take
quand même des
action.
ressources humaines.
We need
en
human
qualité et en
resources,
quantité, si
however,
je puis dire.
to deliver. We
Et,
need
rien ne
quality
garantit que ce sera
resources, and
nécessairement
we
le
need
cas.
a lot of
Donc, ça veut dire que
resources.
l'ensemble des
And
acteurs, nous devons nous mobiliser, chacun
we
à son niveau
therefore
sur
need
ces
to
sujets.
mobilize
Vous l'avez dit, l'ADEME
and
parle
take
de 1
action
million
indeed.
de
As you said,
nouveaux
Adam
emplois.
says 1
Donc, il y
million
aura des
new
emplois qui vont
jobs.
disparaître, il y a
Some
des
will
emplois qui
disappear.
sont nécessaires,
Some
qui
jobs
vont
will remain very
apparaître, qui
necessary.
vont se
Some will
transformer.
emerge. Others
Alors,
will change
est-ce que c'est
profoundly.
nouveau fondamentalement? La réponse est non.
Is this fundamentally
200,
new?
300 ans, même
No.
de façon plus
No.
vieille, il y a des emplois qui ont
200,
évolué.
300 years,
Simplement, je crois qu'il y a un
jobs
consensus
have
sur le fait
changed
qu'on a de
and
moins en moins de
continue
temps.
to change. The
Il faut
fact
aller de
is
plus
that
en
we
plus
have less and
vite
less time
pour être
and
capable de
that we have to go
faire
faster
évoluer
and
et de faire
faster.
apparaître ces ressources nouvelles, ces ressources
We
humaines
need
en
new
qualité et en
human
quantité.
resources
Alors,
in terms of
on retombe
quality
du coup
and
sur ces
quantity.
enjeux de
So,
formation,
we're back to
formation
what you said
initiale,
earlier,
formation
training,
pédagogique,
initial
formation
training,
continue en entreprise,
lifelong training
pour être
at
capable
work
d'adapter ces métiers.
to adapt
Et ce que
skills
je constate, c'est
and
qu'il
adapt
y a
jobs.
des réflexes spontanés où il y a des choses qui sont déjà bien en place. Évidemment, on a tous en
A lot
tête
has
les
already
nouvelles
been
compétences
accomplished.
nécessaires
Look at the new
en matière de
skills we need
biodiversité, en
in the
matière
field of
d'écologie, en matière de
biodiversity,
CO2, en matière de calcul
ecology,
des gaz à effet de serre,
CO2
donc des
emissions,
nouveaux domaines pour lesquels les écoles
greenhouse
d'ingénieurs,
gases, and
les
how to
entreprises se sont
calculate
saisies de
them.
ces
A
thématiques.
lot of schools,
Et moi, je voudrais insister
engineering
sur des métiers
schools
plus
have
techniques,
specialized,
peut-être
but there
plus
are also
basiques,
a lot of
que sont des
more
métiers de
technical
soudeurs, des métiers
and
d'électriciens,
basic
qui représentent
professions,
peut-être plus de la moitié
technicians,
des emplois nécessaires
welders who
pour la réussite de
need,
cette transition.
who represent a
Et ces
lot
métiers,
to make
bon, je pense qu'on en parlera, c'est
to
pas
make
forcément les
this
plus
transition
attractifs,
happen. They may
c'est pas
not
non
be
plus
the most
forcément ceux
attractive
qu'on a en
jobs.
tête le plus.
They may not
Mais
be the
encore une
ones you
fois,
think
si
of
j'ai bien compris, on va
spontaneously,
vers un monde
but
qui sera de plus
my
en plus
understanding
électrique.
is that we're going to
On va
live in
de
a
plus en plus
more
besoin
and more
d'électriciens.
electric
Je
world,
pense
so
qu'on n'a
we're going
jamais
to
eu
need
autant
more
besoin d'électriciens
electricians.
pour
I
mettre en
think we've
place
never needed more
des
electricians
usines de
than now
recyclage de batteries,
for
des
battery
bornes de recharge de
recycling,
véhicules électriques,
for
les
EV
nouvelles usines
charging,
d'hydrogène.
new
Donc,
hydrogen
ces
plants and
compétences et ces
facilities.
thématiques,
So
il va bien
those
falloir
new
qu'on
skills,
continue à
well,
les
we're
former,
going to have
qu'on
to find
continue
them.
à les
We're
faire
going to have
émerger
to
dans ces
create them
entreprises. Et c'est pas
and
toujours ce qu'on
develop
a
them.
forcément en tête le plus spontanément.
It's not
Alors
always
justement,
what we
c'est intéressant
spontaneously
parce qu'il va
do.
falloir les faire connaître d'abord ces métiers pour qu'on
So
aille,
the first
pour les
thing
rendre,
is
pardon
people need to be
d'employer encore ce
aware,
mot, mais
need
les
to be
rendre un peu plus
informed
désirables, les
about
rendre
those
plus
jobs
attractifs,
before you can make them
accompagner
more
aussi peut-être
desirable
les personnes
and
qui ne pensent
attractive.
pas à ces
A
métiers,
lot of people may not
c'est-à-dire
even be
en
thinking
reconversion.
about those
Comment on
jobs.
fait?
Some
Comment
people
s'y
may be willing to
Alors, faut
reskill,
reconnaître que
but
le
they're
domaine de
not
la
aware,
formation
not
est un domaine
informed.
complexe parce que je ne
Well,
sais pas
training
si on peut
is,
s'imaginer le nombre
is
d'acteurs qui
complex.
interviennent de près ou de loin sur
When
ces
you,
thématiques,
when you think
que ce
about it,
soit
there are
en
so
formation
many
initiale ou dans le cadre
parties,
des
so many
formations continues dans le
stakeholders
cadre des
in
entreprises,
initial
acteurs
training,
publics,
lifelong
acteurs privés,
training, there are
collectivités
public
locales. Donc c'est vrai que
organizations,
c'est un vrai
private
magma,
organizations,
et donc plus il y a
municipalities,
d'acteurs compliqués, plus c'est parfois complexe à mettre
which
en œuvre.
means
Bon, néanmoins,
that at the end
il y a
of the
quand même
day,
des
there is a lot
initiatives
of
importantes.
complexity.
Il y a
But
des grandes entreprises
there are
ici
some
présentes qui depuis
interesting
longtemps ont
initiatives.
mis
There
en
are
place
big
des CFA,
companies here
des centres de
that
formation
have
d'apprentis,
their
ou
own
d'alternance.
training
Bon, nous,
organizations
on a créé nos propres
with
formations également sur
apprentices.
ce domaine
We've done
d'électriciens,
this fairly recently
d'ingénieurs ou
to
de
train
techniciens pression, parce qu'on
electricians,
en manque. Donc, il y a des
engineers,
initiatives qui existent.
pressure
Et puis, je
experts,
pense qu'il
for
faut
example.
essayer de rassembler les énergies
We
sur
need
des nouvelles
to
compétences et
mobilize
peut-être de bousculer un
our
peu
workforce
les choses établies. Aujourd'hui, si vous voulez développer des
and
nouvelles
revisit the
formations,
way we
il
do
faut que vous
things.
passiez par
If you're
le
going to
registre
train
national
people
des
differently,
compétences.
today you have to
Ça
go
vous fait
through
à
the
peu près
French
12 à 18
register
mois
of
pour avoir une
competences. It
réponse sur un
takes
dossier
about
de
12
450
to
pages
16
pour
or
savoir si
18
pour
months
votre
to get a
formation est
response
éligible.
to see if
Donc,
your
il y a aussi des
training
freins
is
à la mise
eligible.
en œuvre
So
de
this
ces
is way too long.
nouvelles
There's too
filières
much red tape,
dont on a besoin.
and we need
Je parle pas du
training.
nucléaire.
I'm not even
On
talking
a
about
mis,
nuclear.
12 mois
It took
en version
12
accélérée
months,
pour
and that
faire
was
apparaître
fast,
des techniciens
to
en énergie
identify the
décarbonée.
fact that we
Pour
needed
pouvoir
technicians
former
in
en 12 à 18
decarbonated
mois
energy,
des techniciens qui vont aller
to train them
inspecter et
in 12
contrôler
to
dans le
14
domaine
months.
des énergies décarbonées. Bon, c'est une vaste, c'est un immense chantier.
This
Il a fallu
is
2 entreprises
massive. It
pour
took
réussir à mettre ça en
2
place, pour former
companies
une
combined
première
to do
formation
this
de
and have a first session to train 12 technicians.
Il faut mettre en place les formations, bousculer un peu le domaine de la formation.
So I think we need to revisit the way we train. Training is very complex. And so do you think that we need that one way would be to improve labor relations, to improve training?
Oui, parce que alors, le dialogue social, parce que de plus en plus, on est parfois
labor
interpellé,
relations or
je dirais à juste
social
titre, par les
dialogue,
partenaires
as we
sociaux
call it in
sur
French,
la gestion
is
des
one way.
compétences et l'évolution de certains métiers assez incotisants,
Unions,
et de
employee
savoir ce que fait
representatives
l'entreprise,
talk to us a lot
imagine l'entreprise
about
pour être
training,
capable de faire
about
évoluer les
being
métiers.
more
Donc, ça reste des
proactive,
thématiques
about
dont je ne suis pas sûr qu'on soit tous
finding skills,
les plus
new
concernés ou les
skills.
plus motivés pour les regarder, mais il faut quand même le faire.
And these are important subjects. I don't think we all realize how important those subjects are.
Vous l'avez dit.
As you said, we need to make some professions, some jobs more attractive. There sometimes are salary problems, let's face it. As companies, as corporate organizations, we need to identify what is the meaning, what the meaning is of those professions. And a lot of those meanings are not easy to identify today. Right, so we have to do a lot collectively, from a technical standpoint, from a human standpoint, and the acceleration you referred to has to be a collective one. Jean-Marc Olagnier, being proactive could be a solution. We're looking at 2030, we're looking at 2050. You're very much working for an international company, and today we're talking a lot about the French transition. How do we make things, how do we do things in France, knowing that more and more we're operating in international frameworks? Does this have anything to do with the Green Pact? How about integrating with the transition of our partners, of our competitors? That's a lot of questions. I think we're talking about a global transition and a very local transition at the same time. Greenhouse gas emissions don't stop at our borders, do they? We only have one planet. And this discussion can only be held at a global level. We live in a world which has become more fragmented. We need global collaboration. Emissions in one area of the world impact the rest of the world. And at the same time, as I said, all this is very local. Each country, each territory is different from a regulatory standpoint, from natural resources, in terms of natural resources, water, for example, and from an energetic standpoint. So we need to find national pathways. Sometimes we need to find local pathways to navigate with all this in mind. And we have to recognize that the progress in one country will be part of a global trajectory. Products we consume in one country oftentimes come from other countries. So we have to recognize that all this is very local and global at the same time. I was in Dubai last week, and some of these discussions are very complicated. Interests vary from one country to another, and I have to say I'm very happy to work with EPE on these national trajectories, because each country has its own background, its own history, and back to the bigger picture. I like this notion of bigger picture. I think that as we've said before, this transition will be complex and profound. Some organizations, some companies have really committed to decarbonating by 2030, 2050, and we all recognize that there is a lot of complexity. Scope 1, Scope 2, and then especially Scope 3. Scope 3 requires different ways of working with suppliers, and this is where we see new business models, new jobs, new ways of collaborating together, because the system calls for it. I've seen this in my company. We're a professional service company. We focus a lot on digital transformation. Our commitment was to be carbon neutral by 2025. It profoundly changed the way we do business, the way we travel, the way we deliver our services, the way we use energy. It also transformed the way we work with our key accounts. They know that digital contributes to the climate transition.
au fait qu'il faut s'engager à travailler de manière pluriannuelle.
We have to
Nos
accept
entreprises travaillent
to
sur
work
des cycles
with a
annuels avec
long-term
notre budget,
vision.
parfois sur des
We have
cycles à 3
annual
ou 5
budgets,
ans sur des aspects plus
sometimes,
stratégiques.
we have
Les
3-year
horizons de la
plans,
transition
5-year
écologique
plans.
sont plus longs.
The ecological
Ils
plan will
nécessitent
be much
un horizon
longer.
2030,
We're
parfois
talking
plus,
about
parce que certaines
2030 and
industries
beyond.
ne sont
Some
pas simplement dans un
industries
horizon 2030, mais plus 2050.
are closer
à
to
la fois de
250
planifier en fonction
than
des technologies
2030.
d'aujourd'hui qui permettent de faire des progrès. Mais dans certaines industries,
There is a lot of
ces
technology
technologies sont pas
today
toutes disponibles,
for
sont
some
pas toutes
companies. In
accessibles,
some
et
industries,
donc
the
nécessitent de
technology
planifier
is
à
not
plus long
ready
terme.
yet, is not available
Il y a
yet,
un débat
and
aussi,
will
et
require
vous avez commencé,
more
il y avait,
long-term
vous avez
planning.
dit, politique, réglementation
You talked
internationale,
about
réglementation
regulations,
locale,
about local
nationale.
regulations,
Ces
national
politiques publiques, elles
regulations,
changent
public
régulièrement.
policies
C'est un vrai sujet, c'est un vrai débat. Comment est-ce qu'on
that
fait
change all
pour
the time.
investir à long
How do
terme
you make
dans cette transition
long-term
écologique
investments
dans
in
un
the
contexte
ecological transition
institutionnel qui, lui,
when
est
the
parfois
institutional context
C'est
and
vrai
framework
que
keeps changing?
l'horizon de la transition
True,
énergétique parfois
true,
dépasse les
good point.
horizons réguliers de la politique. Alors on
Sometimes
le voit actuellement.
the two
Nous, en tant qu'entreprise,
don't
on est
really
obligé de prendre des
coincide.
engagements de long terme.
We,
On voit
as
que
companies,
2030,
have to
c'est
take
le bon
long-term
horizon.
commitments. We know
Certaines
2030
entreprises
right
doivent
now is the
s'engager
right
même
target.
à plus long terme
Some
que 2030,
companies
compte
are
tenu de la
looking
disponibilité
beyond
des
2030
technologies.
because some technologies, as I said
Aujourd'hui, quand on
moments
est dans les
ago, is
entreprises,
not
on doit
available yet.
naviguer à travers le monde.
Companies have
Si
to
je regarde
navigate.
juste cette année, ce qui s'est passé.
Look at what happened this
Vous avez
year.
juste quelques semaines, une
Just
décision
a
en
few
Allemagne
weeks
qui
ago,
peut
we had
avoir un impact
an important
sur
decision that was made in
l'accélération
Germany,
ou non de la
which could have an impact on
énergétique sur
the
un certain
energy
nombre d'industries
transition
en Allemagne.
on
Et vous avez un autre pays
German
qui s'appelle
industries.
les
And there is
États-Unis,
another country, the US,
qui a
where
été mentionné tout à
the
l'heure,
IRA, which was mentioned earlier,
et constitue toujours une opportunité d'aller
is
plus vite.
an opportunity
Donc, on
to
va devoir
go
naviguer
faster.
dans ce
So we
monde
as
global
companies
et
have to
local
navigate.
avec un certain
Navigate
nombre
local and global
d'interventions
at the same time.
qui peuvent soit accélérer, soit décélérer un certain nombre d'initiatives.
And
Nous, clairement, en
what
tant
happens could
qu'entreprise,
accelerate
ce qu'on
or
demande, c'est
decelerate
la
what we're
stabilité,
doing.
c'est clair.
We
On
as
demande
companies
la
want
stabilité, on
stability.
demande un cadre
We need
réglementaire qui nous
stability.
permet
We
d'accélérer,
need
qui permet de
regulations
sécuriser
that
nos
allow us to go
investissements,
faster to
mais on n'est
secure
pas
our
complètement naïf non
investments.
plus. On
But we're
sait
not
que le monde
naive.
politique, on le voit bien
We
dans la
know
géopolitique
that
d'aujourd'hui,
in politics,
peut
look at
changer.
geopolitics,
Ça peut
we know
changer
that
parfois plus
politics
vite
can
que ce qu'on
change,
voudrait.
sometimes
Notre job, c'est de
faster
naviguer,
than you
de
think.
voir quelles sont les
So our
opportunités
job
qui
is to
s'offrent à nous
navigate,
pour pouvoir accélérer ou ralentir. Mais l'engagement
identify
qu'on prend
opportunities.
vis-à-vis de nos employés,
The commitment
vis-à-vis de nos
we make
fournisseurs,
vis-à-vis
de nos
our
clients,
suppliers,
sont pas soumis,
customers,
à
and
la politique.
employees
C'est des engagements de long
are
terme
disconnected from
qui engagent nos
politics.
entreprises. Notre job,
They're
c'est de
binding for
naviguer à
us.
travers ces
They're
réglementations,
commitments
mais
we
c'est
make.
pas de remettre en cause nos engagements.
Garder le cap.
Okay,
Garder le
so
cap.
always stay
Même si c'est pas
focused.
toujours simple.
Absolutely. It's not always
Merci
easy,
beaucoup.
but we have to stay
On va
focused.
s'intéresser à
Very
ces
good.
nouvelles collaborations. On a
Let's
commencé à en
talk about
parler
new
et on a déjà évoqué
collaborations.
tout à l'heure le secteur
We
de
just
l'automobile.
talked about the
Et je
automotive
reprends le
industry
micro,
moments
Patrick
ago.
Collard, parce qu'évidemment,
Patrick
s'il y
Kohler,
a un
over
exemple
to
où
you.
cette
You
co-construction, elle est
are
déjà
a good
bien
example of
avancée,
co-construction.
c'est le secteur, c'est la filière
Co-construction
automobile. C'est
in
une
the
des pistes que vous
automotive
explorez déjà
industry.
depuis
It
pas mal
is
de temps.
something you've been exploring
Elle
for a
repose sur
long time.
quoi? Version
How does it work?
2030,
How does it and how
collaboration.
will it work in 2030? How will this collaboration work? Well, let me first say that the people sitting on this panel are partners.
Écologique de l'entreprise. Je vais vous parler, moi, du
I
scope
would
1,
like
2 et
to
3.
tell you about
Et
scopes
le
1,
fait qu'on est une
2,
entreprise
and 3.
internationale, nous équipons
We are
environ
a global
une
organization,
voiture sur 2 au niveau
and
mondial.
we equip approximately one car
Scope
in
1,
2 worldwide.
C'est 1 et 2,
Scope
pardon, ça
1
représente à peu près
and
3%
2
de
represent
nos émissions.
approximately
Le scope
3%
3,
of our emissions.
97%.
Scope 3 represents
Scope 2,
97%
un
of the
objectif
emissions.
de
The
neutralité
objective of
carbone en
Scope 2 is
2025.
carbon neutrality
On
by
est en avance sur notre feuille de
2025.
route.
We're
Ça
ahead
va
of
se
the
faire,
roadmap.
mais ça se fait
We're
grâce
going to deliver,
à nos
and we're going
partenaires
to deliver
qui nous
thanks to our
ont
partners,
permis
because our partners
d'économiser
allowed
de
us
l'énergie
to save energy
et d'acheter de l'énergie
and
décarbonée
buy
en quantité
decarbonated
importante.
energy
Et donc on a investi ensemble
in
dans des
large
parcs
amounts.
éoliens
We
en
invested together
Scandinavie. On a fait un certain nombre d'opérations
in wind
qui ne sont
farms
pas des
in
opérations
Scandinavia,
courantes
in other areas. We
et
had these
habituelles pour
important transactions that are
Ça veut
fairly
dire qu'une
unusual
des
for
clés
us.
de la réussite, finalement,
Does
c'est
that
d'élargir
mean that
le
one of the
cercle
keys
et
of
d'aller
success
chercher de
is
nouveaux
to
partenaires
look for
là
different
où on n'aurait
partners,
pas
do
forcément
things
été
you
au départ,
didn't really do
en dehors
before,
de sa zone de confort, si j'ose dire.
move
on a
out of
l'habitude
your comfort
dans
zone.
l'automobile de travailler dans
Yes,
des écosystèmes.
in the
Et donc,
automotive
c'est rien
industry,
de nouveau
we
pour nous, mais ce sont
work
de
in
nouveaux
ecosystems.
écosystèmes avec de nouveaux
So this is not really new for us, except for the fact that the ecosystems we're talking about are new. 97% is Scope 3. 5% of that is the usage of the products we sell. And 32% is what we can control.
32%,
32%, 50% of the 32% we buy.
Donc ça commence par des matériaux. Et ça commence par des
This
matériaux
means
que nous
materials.
reformulons,
A lot of materials that
qui sont
we
des
process,
combinaisons de
that
matériaux
we
vierges, de
combine.
matériaux
We have
recyclés
recycled
et de matériaux
materials, virgin
biosourcés.
materials, as well as
Partenariats
biosourced
avec le monde
materials.
agricole, par exemple,
So we have
pour
new
toute la
partnerships
partie
with
biosourcée.
farmers
On n'a pas du tout
for
l'habitude,
biosourced
de
products, for
fonctionner
example.
avec
This is something we
cette,
never did before. We never worked
industrie et
with
cet
farmers
on travaille
with
avec
agriculture
des
in
entreprises
the past. We also work with
sont des entreprises de
other
collecte
companies,
de
with other
déchets et de
organizations, such as
recyclage.
companies that recycle
Une autre
or
de nos partenaires
collect
était sur la
waste,
scène
for
tout à l'heure.
example. We had one
Et
of
ça,
those
au niveau
earlier on
international.
stage, and we do
Ensuite,
this
on a besoin de faire du
at a
design
global
pour
level.
scope 3.
Then,
C'est un
more and
design
more,
complètement
we're working
différent
on the
parce
design
que,
for scope
il faut pas se
3.
cacher,
Here again,
ces
something
matériaux
very
coûtent
new.
plus cher.
The materials we're talking about
Et
are more expensive. Structurally,
ont une variabilité plus importante. Donc,
their
ils sont plus difficiles à
variability is
mettre en œuvre.
greater, the more difficult
Et
to
il est
implement, to
indispensable que l'on
use.
trouve des
And we
solutions
therefore
pour
must
compenser
find
ce surcoût,
solutions
parce qu'il n'est
to
pas question
offset this
de continuer
extra
à
cost, to
fournir
compensate.
de l'inflation
We can't just
à l'automobile. On est
increase
déjà à un
inflation.
prix qui, à mon avis,
The prices of cars
déraisonnable.
are already way too high. So is this what is putting you on this journey then to 2030? Absolutely. Is this what led you to this with your partners?
Le monde de la recherche, de nouveaux
with
fournisseurs,
research
des nouveaux
organizations,
matériaux, par exemple.
New suppliers and so on.
Notre objectif, c'est
Yes,
de
our
réduire
objective
le scope
for
3
2030
de
is to reduce
45%
scope 3 by
et atteindre la neutralité
45%
carbone
and reach
qualifiée
carbon
SBTI
neutrality
en 2045.
in
Mais
2045.
2030, pour nous, c'est 2
2030
générations de véhicules.
means
Donc, on
two
n'a pas
generations of
beaucoup de temps devant
vehicles,
nous
which means
pour
we
réussir à
don't
faire ça. Ce que je
have
voudrais
that
dire
much
aussi,
time to
un autre de mes
make this
partenaires à
happen.
ma droite, c'est que cette transformation ne pourra pas se
This
faire sans la
transformation
transformation
will
digitale
only
et en
happen if we have a
particulier
if we have a
l'intelligence
good
artificielle et Gen AI.
digital and if we can use
ces
AI
deux
and
transformations
Gen AI
vont
at
se
the same
combiner.
time. The two will
Ils vont
actually
avoir
combine.
des impacts sur
They
nos
will
organisations
combine and they
qui
will
seront
have
tout à fait
impacts on our
massives.
organizations that are going to be massive.
Ça signifie qu'aujourd'hui, si le secteur automobile est un exemple
Does
de
this
cette
mean
co-construction, de ces nouvelles
Are you saying that the automotive industry is an example, but other industries could do exactly the same thing? Because you work with industries that have nothing to do with automotive.
Mais ce que je veux dire, c'est que
Absolutely.
les transformations
Very much so.
sont en train de s'additionner et que l'on ne pourra plus fonctionner en séquentiel.
We cannot
Et qu'on va être
no
obligé de
longer work
fonctionner
sequentially.
en
We need to
considérant
add
ces
up
transformations
everything we
en
do. We need to
parallèle.
combine
Et
everything,
elles vont
and instead
d'ailleurs
of doing one
s'alimenter
thing
l'une
after
l'autre.
the
Ouais,
other,
et sans l'une,
we
on
need
pourra
to
pas
do
faire l'autre à la
things
bonne vitesse.
at the same time.
Un point peut-être rapidement sur la partie qui n'est pas sous notre contrôle, mais qui est la partie
There is one thing that we
utilisation
don't
de nos
control,
produits.
which is how our products are
On va
used.
bénéficier, nous, de
There,
l'électrification.
We're going to benefit from
donc, plus il y aura de
electrification.
voitures électriques,
The more
mieux,
electric
nous
vehicles
en
there
profiterons
are,
sur la
the
décarbonation.
more we will
Mais on
benefit
peut
in
imaginer
terms of
d'autres éléments.
decarbonation.
On a AXA dans la salle. Je
AXA
pense que de
is
faire
in
du
this room.
diagnostic
I think
over the air, donc d'être capable de
that
prévoir
doing
de façon très préventive et
preventive
juste nécessaire une réparation ou
maintenance
une
on
maintenance
vehicles to
peut
anticipate
aider
repairs
le monde
can,
de l'assurance.
could help
Si on est
the
capable
insurance
de prolonger
industry.
la durée de vie, le
If
cycle
you
de
can
vie de la
increase the
voiture,
life
ça
cycle
permettra à
of
de
a
nouveaux
vehicle,
accédants qui
well,
ne peuvent pas se
that
permettre un
means
crédit
that
sur 4 ans, mais
people
qui
who
pourraient
cannot
peut-être se
afford
permettre
to
un
buy
crédit
such
sur
and
8
such
ans.
car, or
Et
who
si on
cannot
est
afford
capable de
a 4-year
maintenir la
credit,
valeur des
could
voitures,
buy
alors
an
on
8-year
aura un
credit.
business
If you
model
can
qui
keep vehicles
s'approchera
for
de
longer,
celui de l'immobilier.
well then
Et donc, il y a,
we will
dans
become a
tous
little
les
bit like the
départements,
real
dans
estate
tous les
industry.
cas de figure, dans tous les
And,
éléments qui font notre métier, on voit qu'il y a de nouvelles possibilités,
We're
qu'il
seeing
y a
new opportunities
de
that are
nouvelles
emerging.
pistes qui sont tout à fait intéressantes
And some
et
of
qui
them
sont des
are
opportunités.
very interesting.
On commence à voir les briques s'additionner.
Right,
Et
so
on
it looks
arrive tout
like
doucement
it's little by little, the
à la
pieces are
dernière
fitting
brique
together.
de
We're now
ce-
moving to the
de ce
last
rapport. C'est
piece
vous qui
of the
l'apportez,
puzzle.
Catherine McGregor. Parce que,
Catherine
pour
McGregor,
mobiliser,
turning
on
to
l'a
you.
compris, il faut convaincre.
In order
Et
to
donc
mobilize,
embarquer
it is
la
important to
société dans
convince
son
people
ensemble, y compris dans des chantiers
and
qui sont pas
embark
toujours simples.
society at large
C'est un
on
des
projects
défis que
that are
les
sometimes
entreprises doivent
very
aussi résoudre en
complex.
partie
I
avec,
suppose this is a
avec
challenge
les pouvoirs
companies
publics.
have to address
Et,
along
il y a
with
un
the
chiffre
public
qui montre
authorities.
peut-être,
There
assez
is
bien la difficulté.
one number,
17% seulement des individus
17%
aujourd'hui ont à
of
la fois des
individuals
valeurs et
today
des pratiques
have values and practices that are eco-responsible. This struck me. Obviously, if we are going to operate this ecological transition, we're going to need a lot more than 17%. What are the levers? What are the triggers that can be used to get people to subscribe, to have everyone on board? Thomas Bübel earlier on talked about supporting the underprivileged, but how about all the other citizens? How do we get them to accept this collective effort? Well, this is a very relevant question. Sometimes I have the impression that people these days are a bit discouraged. This was a difficult year, and I think this topic comes in a very timely fashion. And in a sense, it allows us to look at things in a positive way. We don't know if it's going to be 1.5, 1.7, but for sure we don't want to be 3 degrees of temperature. And every single effort counts. Anything we can do is worth it. And at the end of the day, we should not be discouraged. If we can't reach the 1.5, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. Let's face it, every gesture, every effort counts. As far as decarbonation is concerned, and how do we get people on board? How do we get citizens on board? Well, I think it will take a lot of convincing. We have to show and tell people that it is possible and that eventually the costs will be controlled. I think we've just heard it now. And today, each industry is at work to make technologies affordable. A lot of technologies are mature. A lot of technologies can be scaled and will be very competitive. Just to put things in perspective, we've done some projections in Europe. What we're seeing is that nearly between 90 and 100% of decarbonation solutions exist and can be scaled. 50% of them are competitive. The other 50% are very expensive, but that means that 50% of the technologies today are competitive. Take hydrogen, for example. What we're seeing is that the hydrogen industry is taking longer, it's taking time to materialize, the cost is not competitive, which means that a lot remains to be done, let's face it, but the other 50%, heat networks to decarbonate buildings, these are solutions that are very mature. They're out there, they can be deployed, especially with ADEME. These are solutions that exist. We have 800 heat networks. We're going to move to 2,000. That is possible. Again, solutions exist, they're mature and competitive. So I think it will take a lot of convincing, collective convincing. And that's what this study does very well, since each industry is presented.
L'étude, justement, elle évoque une contrepartie en termes d'équité globale de la société.
What the study also shows is
est-ce que vous pouvez nous en dire un peu plus?
The more vulnerable populations and how they should be supported. Could you tell us about that? Well, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to cost. Whatever we develop has to be affordable. Developing systems of the future can only be successful if the solutions are affordable. We need to massively develop renewable energies. Scaling solar has allowed us to divide prices by 10. In wind, same thing, costs were divided by 3. We also need flexible, manageable solutions like batteries because you want energy all the time, not only when the sun shines. But by doing so, we're going to end up with systems that work, that are affordable, and that are more sovereign as well. More sensitive to shocks, like last year when energy prices soared. So we have this responsibility when it comes to social acceptance and affordability as well. And I think all companies work on this. I think we're all equally committed. Do you think, as the study says that there will be a need to make changes in governance. More and more we hear about collective deliberation, collective decision-making. Is that something you agree with? Do you think we're going to have to change the way we interact, the way we make decisions?
On va pas couper quand même à quelque chose qui va se passer à plein de niveaux. C'est comme dans les grandes entreprises, tout ça est très complexe, mais il faut bien sûr
large companies are very complex. I think we need to have a very top-down approach. We need a vision, and then cascade this vision down. And then what we are seeing in the utility industry is this real sense of ownership with a lot of local production, biomethane, wind, solar. When you manage projects well, responsibly, with everyone on board, you end up having citizens, local elected representatives who talk about their energy. They say, this is my power. We generated it. And when you hear that, you realize that, yes, you've made it. It's not just top-down. It's also very much bottom-up. People really have this sense of ownership, especially local elected representatives. They now more and more understand that, you know, the decisions that will shape our future are in their hands. Take in Vendée region, west of France, we're developing an offshore platform, a wind farm, and the local authorities decided to take a stake in this project, which means that to a certain extent they own, they're co-owners, and when this works, it's a strong sign. Okay, getting people on board. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Catherine. We're going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to talk to Thierry Baudet, who is the chairman of CESE, to give us his conclusions.
Bonsoir et merci d'être avec nous. C'est vrai que
Good evening. Thank you for being with us.
l'étude mentionne pas mal de chantiers très collectifs.
There are collective projects that have been mentioned repeatedly.
Si je m'avance un peu, mais au-delà de
I
l'action
may be wrong,
habituelle, en tout cas attendue et connue des
apart from
entreprises ou des
the
filières,
business as
et
usual,
au-delà de la seule
and
planification
apart from
écologique,
mere
même si
ecological
on est sur des
planning,
sujets qui sont, ma foi, quand même assez convergents.
things do converge, don't they? Well, let me make a few observations. If I may, as demonstrated in this panel discussion, I think it would be an illusion to consider the ecological transition as something merely technical, and it would be just as big a delusion to consider that the ecological transition is merely political in nature. It seems to me that most technological breakthroughs, you know, the railway, electricity, the internet, and so on, were driven by innovation from the private sector, and in this case, and as posits the Pisani-Ferry report, the ecological transition involves a colossal amount of technological and social breakthroughs, which are driven to a certain extent by political authorities. They set the timeline, the agenda, the end of conventional cars, and a number of other objectives. And I believe that this is rather unprecedented, although maybe the war economy of the U.S. from 1941 onwards could be comparable. Mr. Pouyanné pointed out to me that from our fellow citizens' point of view, it's not going to be very easy to make people change habits because their conventional car does make it possible to go from A to B, and so will an electric car. And a fuel-fired, a gas oil-fired boiler provides heating, and so does an electric heater. So the usage is different, but it's also similar. Now, it all has to do with affordability. energy renovation of housing is absolutely necessary, but it has to be affordable. Now, acceptance, acceptability, and affordability are at the heart of all this. So, given the current situation, we have to seek to involve as many stakeholders as possible: companies, public authorities, local authorities, consumers, and citizens and communities. And we should not take that for granted, because that is something quite challenging. And achieving that involves new procedures, new venues. It involves converging people about new projects, employers, employees, associations, NGOs, federations, citizens, and so on. This should not be taken for granted, and I know whereof I speak. But it is possible, provided we develop a new culture. Acceptance is critical, and in this country we have to develop culture based on consensus. I know that consensus is not always something that we should take for granted, because I think it's better to have a so-so consensus than a disagreement. So I believe that the issues that we're addressing have to do with governance. And a great deal of work has to be done in this country, because it subsumes that we will have the right people in the right place. We will have to we'll have to roll up our sleeves wherever we are. It involves democratic challenges. We have to give room to economic, social, environmental, and participatory democracy. Thank you so much, Thierry Baudet. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Regagnez vos places et nous allons,
Please be seated.
bien passer à la dernière
And now we're
séquence
going to move on to our final discussion, where we shall speak about corporate engagement, corporate initiatives in several areas. Since we finished with the presentation of the survey, I suggest we take a look at a short version of the survey, and of course you will be given the material at the end of this meeting.
Alors, la dimension collective, on l'a tous bien compris ce soir, elle
the
est
collective
incontournable.
dimension is absolutely necessary, but this does not mean that corporations have just been waiting for the paint to dry. On the contrary, you shall see that companies have already moved forward with a number of collective initiatives in order to change and also to involve other players above and beyond the scope of their mere organizations in line with the priorities that you discovered in the survey. So there are several initiatives that you already know, 5 of them that we shall speak about. And there are more, of course, so there are 8. So 3 new initiatives that you shall discover with us this evening. And so we once again have Catherine McGregor, Benoît Bazin, François Pétry, Laurence Bataille, Yann Chouvlar, Jean-Marc Olagnier, Marie-Claire Daveux, and Patrick Pouyanné, who are going to actually pitch these initiatives to us.
Alors, vous aurez tous 2 minutes pour pitcher.
You are all
On est en
given 2
mode start-up,
minutes.
effectivement. Et on va
We're in
commencer
startup
avec
mode.
vous, si vous le voulez bien,
So let's begin with you,
Catherine McGregor.
Catherine McGregor.
Parce que dans cette
Because
alliance lancée en
in
juillet
this alliance
2023,
that was
le
created
pacte
in
PME,
January
il y a des grands
2023, the
groupes qui
SME
s'activent pour
Pact, there are
accompagner
key
dans leur
accounts
décarbonation au
that
moins
are
3400
supporting
PME d'ici
3,400 SMEs by
Comment peut-on faire
2025.
travailler des
How
grands
can you
groupes
bring
et des
together
PME ensemble pour les
large
aider à
groups and
accélérer, j'imagine, leur
SMEs
décarbonation
to
et
help
partager
accelerate
probablement les
decarbonization
bonnes pratiques et
and
l'expérience? Comment est-ce
share
qu'on peut aller
good
plus loin?
practices and experience? How can we
Alors,
go
les PME,
further?
quand il
Over to you.
s'agit, elles
So the
représentent
SMEs
environ 20 à 30%
account for
des
20 or
émissions de gaz à
30%
effet de serre,
of
donc elles ont un impact
GHG
majeur, bien sûr,
emissions.
sur
They
nos objectifs climatiques
play an important
en
role
France, et donc,
regarding
bien
our
sûr,
climate objectives in
favoriser la
France, and
décarbonation de
therefore
manière systématique dans les priorités
encouraging
stratégiques.
decarbonization is
Donc,
a
effectivement,
strategic
nous avons lancé
priority,
avec, un certain
along
nombre d'entreprises
with a
que je
number
vais
of
citer,
companies whom I'd like to mention:
Aéroport
Aéroport
de
de Paris,
EDF,
Bouygues
Sanofi,
Construction,
Schneider
EDF,
Electric, que j'ai dit tout à
Schneider
l'heure,
Electric,
Thales,
Sanofi,
ainsi
and
qu'Engie, bien
Thales,
sûr.
and
C'est
Engie.
d'ailleurs ajouté
We
assez récemment Orano, et
and
nous avons lancé
Orano,
Pacte PME
we
avec
launched
cette idée
this
que la
SME
décarbonation
Pact, assuming that decarbonization involves a cost, it was
PME,
mentioned
si
earlier,
on
and
les
these
aide pas, elles vont
SMEs
pas y arriver
need
toutes seules.
support in order
Or, nous,
to
nous
succeed
sommes des
in
grandes entreprises,
decarbonization.
nous
We
avons
are large
quelques moyens,
companies,
nous sommes souvent
we have
donneurs d'ordre de
resources,
ces PME,
sometimes
et donc nous avons
these
finalement une
SMEs are
responsabilité
our
de les
subcontractors, and
accompagner
therefore
dans
it's our
cette
responsibility to
trajectoire de
support
décarbonation.
them on this
Alors, on travaille avec
decarbonization
elles
trajectory.
pour
We
d'abord
work
faire
with
un
them
bilan,
first to
comprendre c'est quoi
take
votre bilan
stock
carbone,
of
et
their
ensuite travailler
situation in
avec
terms of their
elles
carbon
sur
footprint, and then we
plusieurs
work with them
années
over
à
a period of
réduire
several
ce
years
bilan carbone et
to
les
reduce
accompagner
their carbon
avec
footprint
des
and
moyens
support
soit
them
techniques, des moyens
with
financiers,
technical,
etc.
financial
Donc c'est vraiment une très très belle initiative.
resources.
D'ici à
So it's a great
2025,
initiative, and
on
by
aura
2025
décarboné à
we
peu
will
près
have decarbonized
3400
roughly
PME qui seront accompagnées.
3,400
On espère bien sûr que
SMEs.
beaucoup plus de
And
CAC
we
40
do
nous
hope that
rejoindront.
more
On espère
CAC 40
après
companies
50%
will
des
join
entreprises
us.
CAC 40 sur cette
And
magnifique
it is indeed a
initiative, qui est très
magnificent
importante pour
initiative
tous nos
of
objectifs
consequential
Scope 3
merit
notamment.
regarding our objective, notably as far as Scope 3 is concerned. Pact SME, the first priority pitch today. Benoît Bazin, over to you. Tell us about sustainable service industry buildings. There's a piece of legislation that has just been enacted, reducing emissions by 40%. And a great many companies are involved in various schemes that are complementary and especially have to do with the usage of facilities. What does acceleration mean? Extending the schemes? Yeah, Saint-Gobain, construction materials, I'm very much consistent. Over the past 2 years, we've seen that behavior can help save energy. We've reduced our energy consumption by 10%, but of course we must go further, which is what is required by legislation for buildings of over 1,000 square meters to reduce energy consumption by 40% by 2030. I'm very happy that all these companies featured here are involved in this, not only to observe the law, obviously, but even go further than that. Geographically speaking, many of these groups are international. Saint-Gobain operates in 75 countries, so we can set an example well beyond France. Of course, in France, we have 2,000 sales outlets. products and a number of plants, and we have to extend geographically and go faster in order to meet the objective before 2030. And we can also go beyond the 1,000 square meter threshold for buildings. I'm very happy to see so many companies involved in this team. And the state must also set an example with its own office buildings, because this consumes a great deal of energy in France, and it will be far more pleasant and more efficient for everybody who works in these buildings, notably in terms of education and health administrations. And of course, Saint-Gobain products are at your disposal to meet this objective. Thank you very much. Sustainable office buildings. The third initiative is Eco-Do. François Pétry. Preserving water resources. We've spoken about water to a great extent this evening. It's probably one of our greatest concerns. Since last March, the initiative has been launched. It was launched by Veolia, and because you joined this initiative, how can we see to it that small contributions lead to a major project? How can you encourage others to join you? Well, this truly applies to the way in which we are deploying our Eco-Do initiative. In our 450 sites, we arouse the awareness of our staff to environmental behavior, and each and every employee has to show good practices by deploying these practices with our subcontractors and to our clients and partners as well. 1,000 or so construction sites where we deliver our products and that we are involved in can thus benefit from all this. The idea is to cover the whole territory by improving resource management, water resource management. We consider that our approach will make it possible to achieve better performance and practices when it comes to managing water. 600 local authorities have followed suit with us. So this is an initiative that is indeed gaining ground week after week. Thank you very much, François Pétry. Now we're going to move to the fourth initiative, Laurent Bataille, electrification of corporate fleets, EVs, in other words. This is part and parcel of the survey. Schneider Electric is involved in this initiative, which can play a very important role. The objective of the ecological administration is to reduce CO2 emissions by 36 million tons, 11 million through the electrification of fleets, notably. Yes, it's important because transportation electrification is one of the key three projects of electrification with industry and construction in terms of the impact it has on the environment. And as was said earlier, fleets mean one EV is every other new car is EV, and that can change the whole market. Schneider's testimonial, we joined the initiative in 2020. Why? Well, because fleet electrification is a key element of the decarbonization of our operations, and there will be a milestone in 2030. Vehicles account for 25% of Scope 1 and Scope 2. And it's very important for us to move to electricity. It's not just a shift in terms of production, it's a shift in terms of usage as well. It's very important. So what is the program for us? What is our commitment? Well, EV100. With EV100, our whole fleet will be electric by 2030. We're looking at 2,200 vehicles in France, over 16,000 worldwide. And in order to speed up, what we've implemented is a support scheme whereby we help our employees in setting up a recharge installation at home, and we handle the kilowatt hours used for professional purposes, and we can monitor this with our technology and our employees who are free to choose in the catalog. And there are more and more EVs. It was 9% in 2021, 20% in 2022, and we're near 30% in 2023. And when I see how the market is changing, well, I'm very optimistic, because in actual fact, the supply is broadening. The autonomy, the range is now around 600 kilometers, and the prices are more and more competitive. We spoke about infrastructure, and in actual fact, infrastructure is also picking up speed with more and more charging stations. Thank you so much. Electrification of automobile fleets, EV 100, initiative number 5. Jens Schoenaar, can you join us on behalf of Prima Gaz? Transformation towards sobriety. Sobriety, as we've seen this evening, is something that everybody should be involved in. It's also critical in the definition of business models and strategy. Companies may be a driving force to help accelerate sobriety with suppliers and clients. So it's about having a good dialogue with all these stakeholders in being on the right track towards sobriety. You already do this. What is the benefit of opening up so many opportunities? Over to you. Thank you. If I may, I will speak English because I think it would be better if I spoke English.
That is LPG and bio-LPG, and LNG, bio-LNG, that is, to off-grid customers, that is, rural areas. And here in France, we do this at a relatively small scale. However, as part of our holding company, we do this also at a global scale, much larger. And we actually have been doing this now for decades, for a long-standing period of time. We started off with distributing coal. We then made a small loop. We then moved into the distribution of gas. And we're about to move into the space of making another loop and moving into the renewable space. Now, in terms of the energy trilemma, that is very much associated with the energy transition. As we all know, affordability, accessibility, but also sustainability. How you go about that, that is different in each and every country. Same here in France. And although we're relatively small in size, over time we've built up a very extensive network of partners. With these partners, over the last couple of years, we have actually engaged with them in an institutionalized fashion to really do 3 things. First off, to solidify the relationships that we have with our partners. Second, also to leverage their know-how and understanding and networks outside to really be connected with the outside world. And thirdly, also to connect and calibrate our strategy with society at large. So, to give 2 emblematic examples of what I just said, just this year we had an outside-in view or assessment of the scope and 1 and 2 emissions associated with our value chain. But we also got their help as well in assessing how we can offset basically our scope 3 emissions in actually developing a new renewable molecule. So we have done this now a couple of times, and what we see is that we really are progressing an agenda that is shared all together. And I think that is to prove the point that although we're relatively small in size, we are part of a larger ecosystem. And although we're small in size, we comprise a larger network as well here in France in the total energy mix. So my compelling request to you is, irrespective of your size, make sure you leverage your entire network, because then you can actually bring about a systemic change. And I think there's an expression in many languages: if you go by yourself, you can go fast, but if you go with others, you can go further. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Jan Schoenaar, for speaking about the multiplayer dialogue, Initiative 5. Moving on to Initiative 6, which has to do with collective catering. As we've seen, food is a significant portion of the ecological transition. Diversification of resources is key in the transition process, and also key to human health. Many WHO, FAO say so, of course. People like to eat meat, poultry, and cheese. So in company restaurants, how can you change things? There's an initiative called Menu d'Avenir, Menus of the Future. Tell us more. Thank you. In this country, France, well, food is something that you must take seriously in corporations, and also when it comes to the ecological transition, given that food does have an impact on the soil, on energy consumption, on water, on human health. So when you take a look at things from that angle, food does play a critical role here at EPE when it comes to the ecological transition, because the impact is quite significant indeed. So the impact is quite critical for our employees in our corporations too. And when we started discussing this, well, we spoke with the unions, the employees, and it was very interesting, because how can a company such as ours, we have over 10,000 employees just in France, how can we contribute to this? So we made a commitment regarding this initiative, Menus of the Future. It's a two-pronged, two-phase commitment. Every day there will be a vegetarian alternative, because this was a strong demand from our employees, notably the younger ones, to tell you the truth, but not only the younger ones. It's very important given the positions of the organization. In company restaurants, we did have to set up something connected to this engagement. So beyond a vegetarian alternative in the menu, and this is where the discussion became very interesting, and you see that food is very serious in France, we had to bring in the unions, the employee representatives, in order to try to determine how we could create menus that would contribute to the transition objectives in terms of plant protein that could supersede animal protein, how we could eat less beef and veal, have less meat in our food in general, have more fruit and vegetable, more produce, more natural food, and over a 3-year period with all the stakeholders involved, we changed our menus, our diets, the diets approved, in order to be more in line with something better in line for the transition and for human health. Because when it comes to public health, we have to be a contributor as well. The discussions are not complete yet, but we were speaking about mobilization of players earlier. But this is a topic that's quite sensitive, but that does mobilize people, and it does make us optimistic about the fact that these menus of the future that are already in place will continue to grow moving forward. I think it's a very good thing. Thank you. Initiative 7, Act for Nature, Marie-Claire Dano, please tell us about it. You've heard about the nature-related emergency. Act for Nature is designed to act, and it has been operational for 5 years, with 70 companies, maybe more this evening. Caring has been there from the beginning, and you will tell us how and why. Yes, indeed. Caring has committed and recommitted to Act for Nature, notably because biodiversity is key. There's a lot of talk about climate change. For companies, biodiversity is also a solution to face up to climate change, and it's quite complex. So above and beyond our own the commitments, the regenerative farming and strategy and so on. We found that it's essential to be part of this adventure. It's a collective journey. It brings together the public and private sectors, NGOs, and experts. And we at Caring are convinced that when it comes to biodiversity and environmental challenges, whatever the size of the company or organization, you're never strong enough to take up these challenges single-handedly. Also, in this initiative, things take place at CEO level. This gives responsibility to get the company in motion, to engage the employees, and to achieve tangible, concrete results. As was mentioned, a great many of us are also international in scope. So belonging to a coalition and a collective effort with an international dimension is something very critical to us. And finally, before I encourage you to join Act for Nature, I'd like to tell you that it helps you have an outside view because of the review of the engagements made by a specialized committee that brings together NGOs and experts. So this helps us to be challenged, and it also gives recognition with regard to the engagements where we have been successful. So at the end of this evening, I do hope that you join Act for Nature. Join us, and we shall take great pleasure in working with you. Thank you. Last initiative, Patrick Pouyanné, Initiative 8, Ecological Transition, something that you're very much attached to. The Ecological Transition of Employees, a new initiative. Yes, I was given a challenge. I have to be convincing. We're only 6 in this initiative, but it is of consequential merit given what we are seeking. EPE involves 1 million employees in this country, France. Therefore, with our employees, we have a huge engagement because an employee involves a family, a household of 3 or 4. So actually, here we have a treasure that must be cherished for this ecological transition. So 6 companies have already joined this, and Total Energies, in a social crisis, we had an idea. We have to align the company's values with its employees' desires when it comes to ecological transition. Therefore, involving the employees is a good idea. Negotiations lasted 2 or 3 months with the unions, and the agreement was unanimously signed. And now we're committed to supporting the investments that our employees will make in their homes or in mobility. Electric cars and vehicles, 80% of their expenses will be covered with a cap, of course. 35 employees will be involved in France, and I believe that this is part of my motivation to contribute to EP. I'd like to pay a tribute to Claire, because thanks to you and you all, we looked at the 8 initiatives and we joined 7. There's 1 initiative we did not join, by the way. But this has made us kick many ideas around, and companies can make critical contributions to foster the ecological transition. So I'd like to thank everyone involved in these initiatives. 1 million employees. There are only 6 companies here, but there's a lot of potential. And this is an initiative that has to be extended across all our corporations for our employees. By doing this, you can reconcile the pride of working in our corporations and the desires that they have as citizens. This is at the crossroads of our people's concerns and desires. That is what I have to tell you to try to convince you. Thank you very much.
Okay, switching hats. You can now speak as the chairman of EPE. Absolutely, I was responsible for being late, 12 minutes late, but then everyone else spoke too long, so we're now 20 minutes late. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Thank you so much. This was a very interesting conversation. I'd like to thank everyone, including those in the audience.
Je sais que certains, lorsqu'ils ont lu la tribune, ont eu des doutes sur notre engagement.
I know some may have doubts or had doubts about our commitments. I think we've sent a very strong signal, a very strong sign to everyone. I think all the CEOs have strongly shown their commitment and engagement. But what's next? Well, what's next is that we need to get all employees on board, and we need to share the ETE 2030 study with employees, but also with other stakeholders. We can only make this ecological transition successful with all stakeholders on board. And this is EPE's mission. It is to make the best of this study. Frugality, circularity, and the living are the three keywords of this study. Let's commit to them. EPE will be taking at least 2 initiatives in 2024. Claire, correct me if I'm wrong. There will be a first conference on ecological transition and human resources in partnership with trade unions to initiate this movement, which is essential to better understand those priorities. A second conference will be organized with the financial community. EPE has been very actively working with the financial world and sustainable finance. We've worked on the topic as well in the past. We want to push this dialogue forward and really get the financial community on board. And I'm sure there will be more ideas. Once again, this is the end of a study, and it is a new start of a stronger collective commitment. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. We're delighted to see that we have a full house. And see you soon. Bye-bye. And please don't forget the last word of the video of this movie, which really is the tagline of EP, building together a new prosperity compatible with the limits of our planet. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup et un grand bravo à
Thank you so much.
Qui travaille sous la houlette de Claire.
Congratulations to the entire EPE team working with Claire. I know they worked very hard to get this study completed. I know it's been a lot of work, a tremendous effort. In a moment, we will be stepping outside for cocktails. We will continue, hopefully, our discussions. Wishing you all a wonderful evening. May I please ask all speakers to join us on stage for a quick picture. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening and see you later.